You're pregnant.
No,
The test says otherwise.
that's impossible.
Impossible?
This marriage was fake.
Fake marriages still make babies.
Stop joking.
Does this look funny to you?
You said we wouldn't cross the line.
You crossed it first.
What?
You made me fall in love with you.
If you've ever wondered what it feels like to sign your life away to save someone you love, stay with us. This is Amade's Afro Case Stories, and this one will break you open. 2 months earlier, the walls of Lagos University teaching hospital smelled like antiseptic and quiet grief. Amara Okafor sat in the corridor outside room 14B with her knees pressed together, and a hospital bill folded so many times it had gone soft at the creases. She didn't need to open it. She had memorized every number, every zero, every brutal comma separating her from her brother's survival. Inside that room, Emeka was sleeping through his 4th dialysis session of the month. He was 22 years old and already the color of someone who had made peace with disappearing. Amara was 25. She had not made peace with anything. She was in her 3rd year of medical school, which meant she understood exactly what kidney failure did to a body, exactly how much time Emeka did not have, and exactly how useless her understanding was without money. The numbers didn't care that she was brilliant. The hospital didn't accept intelligence as payment. And their mother had died 4 years ago, owing the same hospital a smaller debt that Amara was still quietly paying off in installments. She pressed the bill flat against her thigh and stared at the ceiling. A man in a dark suit sat down beside her. She didn't look at him. Men in dark suits in hospital corridors were either lawyers or priests, and she had no use for either. "Miss Okafor," he said. She looked at him then. He was Korean, mid-40s, with the calm face of someone who had delivered difficult news so many times it no longer registered as difficult. He held a slim leather folder. "I'm not interested," she said. "You haven't heard the offer. Men who find women in hospital corridors don't bring good offers." He placed the folder on the bench between them. 50 million naira. Your brother's full treatment covered surgery, post-op medication, 1 year of monitoring. All expenses absorbed. She didn't touch the folder. "What do you want?" "A marriage. 1 year. Public appearances, events, family dinners. No physical requirements beyond what a camera can see. At the end of 12 months, a clean and mutual dissolution. You walk away with the money and your brother walks away healthy." Amara stared at the folder. "Who?" "Seo Junho, heir to the Seo Grand Hotel Group. His grandfather requires proof of a stable marriage before transferring the chairmanship. The timeline is tight." "And he agreed to this?" The lawyer's pause was 1 second too long. "The terms have been communicated." She stood up. "No." She walked back toward room 14B. She pushed the door open. She looked at Emeka's face, the sunken eyes, the bruised arm where the needle went in, the slight wheeze of his breathing, and she held onto the door frame. The doctor appeared at her shoulder. He was gentle about it, which made it worse. "Miss Okafor, without the transplant surgery within the next 6 to 8 weeks, I don't think he'll make it to the dry season." She stood there for a long moment. Then she turned around and walked back to the bench. She picked up the pen the lawyer was already holding out. Her hand was trembling so finely that she almost didn't notice it. She signed the contract with her full name, Amara Chidinma Okafor, in the clean, precise handwriting her mother had drilled into her. Because their mother had believed that how you wrote your name was how the world first learned to take you seriously. She handed the pen back. "When do I meet him?" she said. The signing was scheduled for the following Tuesday in Seoul. Amara had never been to South Korea. She had barely left Lagos. She arrived at Incheon Airport in a blazer she had borrowed from her roommate and heels that were half a size too small, and she stood in the arrivals hall with her single carry-on and her jaw set like a door she had decided to bolt from the inside. Car was waiting. A driver. No Junho. She sat in the back of the black vehicle and watched Seoul rise around her. The gleaming towers, the bridges arching over the Han River. The organized chaos of a city that had clearly decided long ago to take itself seriously. It was beautiful and it meant nothing to her. She was here for 50 million naira and a kidney. The city could keep its beauty. The Seo Group headquarters was a glass tower that caught the afternoon light and threw it back at the sky like it was showing off. She was escorted to the 42nd floor, into a conference room with a long mahogany table, a wall of windows, and 4 lawyers arranged like furniture. She sat down. She waited. 22 minutes later, the door opened. Seo Junho walked in already reading something on his phone. He was tall, taller than she'd expected from the photographs, with the sharp, composed face of someone who had learned early that expressions were a form of information he didn't owe anyone. He wore a charcoal suit with no tie, the top button undone, which on him looked like a deliberate statement rather than carelessness. He sat down across from her without looking up from his phone. She watched him. He finished reading, set the phone face down on the table, and looked at her for the first time. His eyes were dark and steady and completely unreadable. "Miss Okafor," he said. "Mr. Seo," she replied. "You've reviewed the full terms?" "I've reviewed what was sent to me." Something shifted in his expression, too small to name, too fast to catch. "Good. Then we can proceed." "Before we proceed," she said, "I want 3 things on record." One of the lawyers moved to write. Junho didn't stop him. "First," Amara said, "my brother's treatment begins within 72 hours of signing. Not after. Not pending. 72 hours. Junho nodded once. "Second, I remain enrolled in my medical program. I will attend public events when required, but my studies are not negotiable." Another nod. "Third," she held his gaze, "we don't cross the line. Whatever this is, it's professional. We play the role in public. In private, we are strangers sharing a space. That's the boundary." Junho looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face, not warmth exactly, but something adjacent to respect, moved like light across still water. "Don't mistake this arrangement for affection," he said. "Good," she said. "I don't like arrogant men anyway." The lawyers looked at their papers. Nobody said anything. Junho picked up his pen, signed, slid the papers to her side. She signed, and the room rearranged itself quietly around 2 people who had just done something neither of them fully understood. The press announcement happened 3 days later. At a charity gala the Seo group sponsored every autumn. Amara wore a dress that Junho's stylist had selected, deep burgundy silk, structured at the shoulders, the kind of dress that made you look like you had always belonged in rooms like this. She had never worn anything like it. She refused to let that show on her face. She stood at the edge of the ballroom watching the crowd when Junho materialized at her side. He was in black tie. He looked like he had been born in black tie. She hated how effortlessly he inhabited spaces that would have taken her a decade to feel comfortable in. "Ready," he said. "I'm always ready," she said. They walked in together. Cameras found them immediately because of course they did, because he was Seo Junho and rooms reorganized themselves around him automatically. She felt the flash of every lens, the sudden interest radiating through the crowd, the way people leaned to whisper to each other with their eyes still pointed at her. She smiled. She had practiced the smile. It was the right kind, warm but not desperate, confident but not cold. Then Junho's hand found the small of her back. She stiffened. Barely. He leaned close enough that his voice was only for her. "There's a photographer from Korea today at your 11 o'clock. Smile like you mean it. Unless you want them to know we hate each other." "I don't hate you," she said through her smile. "You will," he said. And then he turned to greet a man in a gray suit, and Amara stood beside him and laughed at the right moments and touched his arm at the right moments and was, by every external measure, exactly what the contract required her to be. Inside she was doing math, calculating how many of these evenings she could survive before something cracked. The Seo family estate was in the hills north of the city, a compound really, a main house and 2 smaller ones connected by gardens that someone maintained with the devotion of a religion. Amara's room was on the 2nd floor, west wing. Junho's was at the opposite end of the corridor. The distance between their doors was exactly the length of something unspoken. She settled in quickly, the way she had learned to settle into difficult spaces. Her textbooks went on the desk. Her brother's photograph went on the nightstand. She video-called Emeka from the hospital in Lagos that first night. He was post-surgery prep, already looking slightly less gray, already making jokes about her being a Korean drama character now, and she laughed with him until she could hear he was tired, then hung up and sat in the quiet of a room that cost more per square meter than her entire Lagos apartment. She did not cry. She had decided somewhere on the flight that she was not going to cry about any of this. She studied instead. 3 hours of nephrology, 1 hour of pharmacology. She fell asleep at her desk with her face on a textbook about renal pathology, which would have made Emika unbearably smug if he'd known. She didn't know it, but Junho was still awake. She found out 2 weeks later, by accident, because she couldn't sleep herself and went to the kitchen at 2 a.m. for water, and found him sitting at the kitchen island in the dark with his hands flat on the counter, and his breathing controlled in the specific way that meant it was taking effort to keep it that way. She stopped in the doorway. She should have retreated. That was the contract. Strangers sharing a space. Instead, she went to the cabinet, got 2 glasses, filled them both from the filter, and set one in front of him. She sat on the stool across the island and drank her water and didn't look at him. After a moment, he picked up his glass. They sat like that for 15 minutes. Not talking. Not performing. Just 2 people in a dark kitchen being quietly awake. When she stood to leave, he said, "Thank you." She didn't ask what for. She just went back to bed. The pattern repeated. Not every night, but often enough to become a thing. She would find him. She would sit. They wouldn't talk much. Slowly, then less slowly, they started talking a little. Not about anything important. Logistics. Her coursework. The gala schedule. The food at the estate, which was excellent but always exactly the same. "You could ask the cook to change the menu," he said one night. "It's not my kitchen." He looked at her steadily. "For the next 10 months it is." She considered that. "I'd want more pepper soup." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. The architecture of one. "I'll mention it." The next evening there was pepper soup. She stood in the kitchen doorway and stared at the pot and felt something dangerous and inconvenient shift in her chest. She shut it down immediately. She had a contract. She had a boundary. She had built walls for good reasons, and she was not going to let a pot of soup knock them over. She ate the soup, thanked no one, and went back to her room. Junho's stepmother arrived on a Thursday with luggage, and a smile that didn't reach anywhere near her eyes. Her name was Yoon Hae-suk, and she was the second wife of Junho's father, who had died 3 years ago and left a complicated will and an even more complicated woman behind. She looked at Amara the way certain people look at things they've decided not to take seriously. At dinner, she said, "Junho, your grandfather asks whether Miss Okafor has met the family lawyer yet regarding the inheritance documentation." "She's been briefed," Junho said. "Of course." Hae-suk smiled at Amara. "It must be quite an adjustment. Coming from Lagos, was it? To all of this." "Every adjustment has its learning curve," Amara said pleasantly. "Of course. It's just that women who enter these arrangements for financial reasons sometimes struggle with the social requirements, the refinement, the expectations." The table went quiet. Amara set her chopsticks down with great care. She looked at Hae-suk with the particular stillness of a woman who had grown up being underestimated and had long since decided to use it as a weapon. "Women like me," she said, "marry rich men for survival. Isn't that the phrase?" She picked her chopsticks back up. "Women like me also survive without stealing husbands. So I suppose we all have our different skill sets." Junho made no sound, but under the table she felt his knee shift, a very small press against hers. There and gone. A signal she wasn't sure she'd imagined. Hae-suk's smile calcified. Dinner continued. Amara found the file by accident. She was looking for a printer in Junho's home office. She'd asked, he'd said to use his, he wasn't home. And the file was in a drawer she pulled open looking for paper. Not hidden. Not locked. Just sitting there. A photograph. A woman beautiful with the kind of face that photographs fell in love with. Korean. Early 20s. And underneath the photograph a name, Park Soo-yeon, and a date. The date was 4 years ago. The document behind the photograph was a wedding invitation. Seo Junho and Park Soo-yeon. Amara stood in the office and looked at it and thought, "There's a whole story here I haven't been told." She put it back. She printed her document. She left. That night she didn't go to the kitchen. She stayed in her room and thought about all the things people bury in drawers and call moving on. The storm came in October, fast and sharp, the kind of weather that catches soul between seasons and shakes it. The power went out just before midnight. The estate had generators for the main systems, but the upper hallway went dark, and when Amara went to check her phone charger she walked straight into Junho in the hallway, and he dropped the candle he was carrying, and for 2 seconds they were standing in complete blackness with their arms pressed together. "Sorry," she said. "It's fine." He retrieved the candle. The flame came back. It painted them both in amber. They ended up in the sitting room off the second floor, because it was the room with the fireplace, and the fireplace didn't need electricity. She sat on one end of the couch. He sat on the other. The fire did what fire does, made everything feel like a confession was coming. She didn't expect it to be him who broke first. "I don't sleep," he said. Not an explanation. A statement. As if he was reading from a list of facts about himself. "I know," she said. "It started 4 years ago." He was staring at the fire. "I used to sleep fine. Then something happened. And after that, every time I close my eyes in the dark, something in my chest starts to." He stopped, pressed his hand flat against his sternum. She didn't fill the silence. She had learned by now that he needed silence the way other people needed prompts. "Everyone who claims to love me," he said quietly, "eventually leaves." She thought about the file in the drawer. About the wedding that didn't happen. About the date 4 years ago. Maybe they were never strong enough to stay, she said. He turned and looked at her. The firelight was on the left side of his face, the dark on the right, and in between was an expression she had never seen on him before. Unguarded, uncertain, completely unperformed. "You're not what I expected," he said. "I know," she said again. He leaned forward. She didn't move back. And then slowly, like a decision made at the very last second, he kissed her. It was a brief kiss. Soft. Almost questioning. She pulled back first. Neither of them spoke. The fire crackled. The storm pressed against the windows. She stood up. "Good night, Jun-ho." She walked back down the dark hallway to her room. She sat on the edge of her bed in the dark and pressed both hands to her face and felt, with absolute clarity, that she had just stepped over a line she could not step back over. What she didn't know, couldn't know, was that outside the sitting room window, on the garden path that looped past the south side of the house, someone had been standing in the rain with a camera, and the shutter had already clicked. 6 weeks later, Amara sat in a bathroom on the 3rd floor of a private clinic in Gangnam and stared at a pregnancy test. She took 3 more. She sat on the cold tile for a long time. The doctor confirmed it at noon. 8 weeks. She sat in the consultation room and answered the questions on autopilot. Last menstrual cycle, current medications, any complications, and when the doctor said congratulations, she said thank you, because her mouth was doing things independently of her brain. She drove back to the estate. Jun-ho was in the main sitting room on the phone, already turning toward the door when she walked in like he'd been waiting for footsteps. Something in her face stopped him mid-sentence. He said something brief into the phone and hung up. She held the test out. He crossed the room. He looked at it. He looked at her. The silence stretched. "This changes nothing," he said, and then immediately visibly regretted it. She could see him hating the words even as they landed. "Then why?" she said. "Do you look terrified?" He looked at her for a long moment. When he spoke, it was quiet, the quiet of someone saying a thing they hadn't meant to say out loud. "Because now I have something to lose." She didn't know whether to believe him. She didn't know whether it mattered if she believed him. She was pregnant. She was in Seoul. She was in a fake marriage that had stopped feeling entirely fake at some point she couldn't identify. She went upstairs. She called Emeka. He picked up on the second ring, sounding better than he had in months. The surgery had gone beautifully, the doctors were pleased. He was doing physiotherapy and complaining about the food. She laughed at his complaints and said she missed him and did not tell him about the test. Not yet. When she hung up, she noticed the house was very quiet. She was about to go to bed when she heard voices from the hallway below. Jun-ho and someone else near the study. Something in the urgency of the voices made her stop at the top of the stairs. She heard Haesuk's name. She heard the word clause. She heard contract and pregnancy and 18 years, and she stood perfectly still and made herself listen, because she had already paid too much for this arrangement to stop listening now. Then she understood what she was hearing. The original contract, the one she had signed in the hospital corridor, had been modified before it ever reached her. A clause had been added, buried in the legal language, that she had either missed or had never been shown clearly. If a pregnancy resulted from the marriage, the dissolution was suspended. The contract could not be dissolved until the heir reached the age of 18. She had not signed a 1-year agreement. She had signed her life. And the grandfather's signature was on the alteration. She stood at the top of the stairs with her hand on the railing and felt the floor tilt slightly under her. The way floors do when you realize you've been standing on something that was never what it appeared to be. She went back downstairs. She opened the study door. Junho turned. He was alone now. Hae-suk had gone. His face changed when he saw her expression. "Did you know?" she said. Silence. The wrong kind of silence. The kind that isn't quite a yes but isn't a no either. The kind that a person produces when they are trying to calculate what version of the truth is survivable. It was enough. "Did you know?" she said again, and her voice was very level because she had learned, growing up with nothing, that when you are most afraid you have to be most still. "Amara, don't say my name like that." I knew the grandfather wanted permanence built in. I did not know the specific clause. I did not know he'd done it without telling you. Is that supposed to help? He stepped toward her. She stepped back. "I need time," she said. "Don't come near me tonight." She went to her room. She packed one bag methodically, precisely the way she did everything when she was breaking. She left at 11 that night, took a car to a hotel, and checked in under her own name because she had stopped caring whether anyone was watching. She called Emeka at midnight. He didn't pick up. She called the hospital. The nurse on duty said very carefully that Emeka had checked himself out that afternoon, against medical advice. She sat on the hotel bed and felt something cold and specific move through her. Emeka would never check himself out. He knew better. She had made him promise. Her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. A photograph. It was Emeka. Alive, upright, but somewhere that was not the hospital. Somewhere that looked like a parking garage. The message said, "Come back to the estate. Come alone. Come now." Junho was already moving before she got the call through to him, because he had been watching the cameras. Because something had told him, an hour before she disappeared, that something was wrong. He played back the security footage, found the gap, found the timestamp, and was already on the phone to his head of security when Amara's number lit up his screen. She told him in 3 sentences. He left in 2 minutes. He found the car in 40. He found the parking garage in 45. He did not find Hae-suk there, but her people were, and they scattered when Junho's security team appeared, and Emeka was in the back seat of a stopped vehicle, bewildered and unhurt but deeply shaken. Junho pulled him out himself. He called Amara. She was already running toward them. The rain had started again. She reached Emeka first, grabbed his face in both hands, checked his eyes, his wrists, his expression, the reflexive triage of a medical student and a terrified older sister. And when she was satisfied he was whole, she stepped back and her legs nearly gave out. Junho caught her. She twisted away. The rain came down harder. "Don't," she said. "Don't touch me. I don't even know if any part of this marriage was real." He let go of her arm. The rain was soaking through his jacket. He stood in it without moving, the way people stand in things when they've decided to stop fighting the weather. "The contract was fake," he said. She laughed. A short, terrible sound. "My feelings were not." She looked at him. The rain was on his face, his hair. He was not performing anything. He was just standing there being true, which was, she hated this, somehow worse than a lie would have been. "You kept things from me," she said. "Yes. You let me believe I had understood what I signed." "Yes. Then how am I supposed to trust anything?" He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You trusted yourself enough to sign the first time. For Emeka. With nothing but hope that it would work out." He met her eyes. "Trust that person. Not me. Yourself." She stood in the rain. Emeka behind her said quietly, "Amara, let's go inside." She didn't go back to their shared bedroom, but she didn't leave the estate again either. She gave herself 3 days of distance, sleeping in the east guest room, eating at different hours, studying with her door closed. And in those 3 days something in her sorted itself, the way sediment settles after water has been disturbed. Not perfect, not resolved, but clearer. She emerged on the 4th day and went looking for Junho. He was in the garden, which surprised her. She had not thought of him as someone who sat in gardens. He was on the phone and then he wasn't because he saw her and ended the call. She sat beside him on the bench. She looked at the garden. He looked at the garden. "Tell me about Suyun," she said. The name landed like a stone in still water. She watched the rings move through him. "She was my fiancée," he said. "I know. I saw the file." 4 years ago. He was quiet. Then, she died. Amara turned to look at him. There were people who wanted to damage the CO group, corporate rivals, and old business dispute. They had found out about our engagement and they were using her to get to me. Information they wanted. Leverage. His voice was very careful. Very even. She found out. She refused to cooperate. He stopped. They made it look like she'd simply left. Disappeared. Gone abroad. My family, my grandfather, Haesuk, they let me believe she had abandoned me. They thought it was kinder. He said that last sentence like a man who had recently discovered what kindness could do when it's deployed strategically. Junho, she said. I spent 4 years believing everyone I loved was fundamentally incapable of staying, he said. That's why I became what I am. Managed. Disciplined. No loose threads. He looked at his hands. You're the first loose thread I haven't been able to cut. She looked at him for a long time. She thought about what it cost to love someone when you believed, in your deepest architecture, that love had an expiration date you could not see. She took his hand. Not as a performance. Not for cameras. Just his hand in hers. He didn't move for a moment. Then he turned his palm over and held on. The board meeting was called for November. Junho walked in with his lawyers and the documentation of Haesuk's actions, the kidnapping, the contract manipulation she had pressured the grandfather's secretary to assist with, the photograph she had sold to a tabloid from the night of the storm. The evidence was meticulous. Junho had spent 2 weeks building a case that would withstand any counter. Haesuk sat across the table and watched him present it with the expression of someone who had always known this room would eventually turn. The board voted. Haesuk was removed from her advisory position. Legal action followed in a separate chamber. The chairman, Junho's grandfather, Seo Byung-wook, a man of 81 who moved carefully and said little, was present. He watched everything from the head of the table with eyes that gave nothing away. Afterward, when the room had emptied, he asked to speak to Junho alone. Amara waited in the corridor. Junho came out 12 minutes later. She read his face the way she had learned to read it, the slight tension around his jaw when he was processing something, the stillness of his hands when he decided something. He wants to meet with us, he said. Together. This weekend. What does he want? I don't know. He wouldn't say. She thought about what she knew of the grandfather. The man who had altered a contract, who had engineered a trap, who had been manipulating lives from a throne room the entire time she'd been in this city. Fine, she said. But this time I read everything before I sign anything. Junho looked at her. Almost smiled. Fair. The board reconvened 2 weeks later and Junho stood at the head of it. Not because he'd been appointed. Because Haesuk's faction had collapsed, and the remaining board members were looking for someone who knew what the company was, and wasn't terrified of what it might become. He was the only person in the room who qualified. Someone raised the question of the inheritance clause, the pregnancy, the 18-year provision, the validity of it all given the circumstances of its insertion. Junho looked at Amara, who was seated to his left in the capacity of prospective heir's mother, which she had agreed to for this meeting, because the lawyers had asked, because the situation was what it was. He turned back to the board. The question of the contract's validity, he said, is for lawyers to settle. What I can tell you is this. He paused. Protecting my wife and child is not a business calculation for me. And if this empire requires me to treat them as one, then I'm not the right person to run it. Silence. I am, however, the right person to run it if we're willing to agree that human beings are not line items. He looked around the table. Are we? The vote was 11-3. Seo Junho became acting chairman that afternoon. Amara stood in the hallway outside the boardroom and looked at the city through the floor-to-ceiling windows and felt something that was very close to pride. Not in him specifically, but in the sequence of events that had somehow led here. The hospital corridor. The trembling signature. The pepper soup. The storm. She put her hand on her stomach. The baby was 12 weeks now. Strong heartbeat. The sonographer had tilted the screen toward her, and she'd looked at that small bright flicker, and felt her entire chest rearrange itself. The grandfather died on a Tuesday. Not dramatically. Not in the middle of something. He died in the early morning in his bedroom with his personal physician present, and the household was informed with the quiet efficiency that wealth applies to everything, including grief. The lawyer called Junho 3 days later regarding the estate. Among the documents, the will, the asset distributions, the letters for various board members, there was a USB drive. No label. The lawyer handed it over with a note in the grandfather's handwriting that said only, "For Junho and his wife. Watch together." They sat in the study that evening, Amara's legs folded under her on the couch, Junho's hand resting near her knee. He plugged the drive in. A video file. The grandfather's face, seated in the chair from his private office. He looked tired. He looked actually like a man who had been carrying something heavy for a very long time and had finally put it down. "Junho," he said on the screen. "And I hope your wife. If she's watching, then you made the right choice. If you're watching this alone, then I was wrong about you and I apologize." A pause. "I altered the contract. I will not pretend otherwise. I told Haesuk nothing. What she did was her own cruelty, and I will have already dealt with it before you see this. But the clause, that was mine." He folded his hands. "I trapped you both. Not because I didn't trust you. Because I know what this family does to love. I've watched it happen in every generation. We are very good at building things, this family, and very bad at keeping people. Your father lost his first wife to loneliness. I lost your grandmother to ambition. I saw you losing yourself to grief." He looked directly at the camera. "I thought if I could just get you both inside the same walls long enough, if I could make leaving difficult, love might have time to become real before either of you realized that was what was happening." Junho was very still. "I know it was wrong," the grandfather said. "I know it was manipulation dressed as strategy. I am an old man and I have lived long enough to know that the line between those two things is mostly what you call it after." He exhaled. "The baby is a gift I did not engineer. Whatever happened between you, that was you. That was real. I want you to know I know the difference, even if I didn't trust it enough to simply wait and see." He looked at his hands. "The only thing I was right about," he said, "is that this family needed someone strong enough to stay. I believe she is. I believe you finally let yourself be someone worth staying for." A pause. "Take care of each other. Take care of my great-grandchild. Fix what I broke and keep what I built. That's all I ask." The video ended. Amara realized she was crying. Not dramatically. Just quietly, in the way that grief and relief sometimes arrive together when you've been running on tension for so long. That softness, when it finally comes, leaks out of you before you know what it is. Junho put his arm around her. She let him. The complications showed up at 20 weeks. She was in her regular checkup routine, the kind of appointment she'd stopped dreading. The sonographer went quiet in a particular way, and then called the doctor in, and then the doctor sat across from Amara with the careful face of someone who had learned how to give news in a way that didn't immediately shatter people. Placenta previa. Severe. And a rare condition underlying it that elevated the risk during delivery to a level that required, very seriously, very honestly, preparation for multiple outcomes. She sat in the car afterward and stared at the street. Junho called at the exact wrong moment. She answered without deciding to. "How was the appointment?" She tried to find a way to say it. "Amara." His voice changed. "What happened?" "There might be complications," she said. "During delivery. They need to plan for different outcomes." Silence. "I'm coming," he said. "You're in a meeting." "I'm coming." He was there in 20 minutes. He sat beside her in the car and didn't say anything immediately, which was the right choice, and she knew it was the right choice and she was grateful for it. Eventually she said, "I'm not scared of dying." "I know," he said. "I'm scared of leaving Emeka." A pause. "I know. And I'm scared," she stopped, pressed her lips together. Tried again. "I'm scared the baby won't know what any of this was. How much it already." She couldn't finish it. Junho turned in his seat. He took her face in both hands, carefully, the way you hold something that you are terrified of losing. "Then we make sure," he said. "We write it down. We record everything. I will tell that baby every single day for the rest of my life what you were like. How you walked into a lawyer's office with bad shoes and a hospital bill, and the most frightening calm I had ever seen. How you made me sit in the dark and drink water until I remembered how to breathe. How you stayed." She looked at him. "You stayed," he said again. "Through everything we threw at you. You stayed." She broke then, completely, finally, the way she had refused to break in the hospital corridor and in the hotel and in the rain and in all the terrible moments that had come before this one. She put her forehead against his shoulder and let herself be held. Outside the car, Sol moved past them. The bridges, the city, the autumn light on the Han River. Indifferent and beautiful and completely unbothered by the two people inside a parked vehicle, quietly holding each other together. The delivery was planned. The team was prepared. Junho was there. Emeka flew in from Lagos, fully recovered, the healthiest he'd looked in years, and sat in the waiting room doing absolutely nothing useful, which was all anyone needed him to do. It was hard. It was long. There were 40 minutes in the middle of it that no one in that family would ever fully describe to anyone. And then, a sound. Small. Absolute. Completely certain of itself. Junho was holding Amara's hand so tightly that she'd had to tell him twice to ease up. She was exhausted in a way she had no previous reference point for. She was also completely irreversibly still there. The doctor placed the baby in her arms. A girl. With a face that was somehow already its own argument, already entirely itself. Amara looked at her. Junho looked at both of them. And whatever he'd been carrying, the grief, the years of closed rooms and dark kitchens and controlled breathing, she watched it leave his face. Not dramatically. Just quietly. Like a door finally being left open. "What's her name?" the nurse asked. Amara looked at Junho. He looked at her. "You choose." She looked at the baby. "Adiz," she said. The word was Ibo, daughter of royalty. "Adiz Suyan Seo." Junho went very still. "So she carries both," Amara said. He nodded. Once. Unable to speak. Outside the room, Emeka was crying loudly and without embarrassment into his phone, probably calling every person he had ever met in his entire life. The nurses were used to waiting rooms. This waiting room was fine. Inside, Amara held her daughter and her husband held her in the window framed Seoul in the early evening light. Gold and glass and the long bridges over the Han River. And the city looked, for once, like somewhere worth arriving. That's the end of this episode of A Maid's Afro K-Stories. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And if you're new here, welcome. Subscribe and come back for the next one. We're just getting started.